Two vascular surgeons walk into a bar and come out with a podcast. We are talking everything vascular and not. Welcome to the Life of Flow podcast.
The following podcast is not relating to my teachings and work at Del Cedar Medical Center and is for entertainment purposes only. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of the Life of Flow podcast. Today we had an amazing conversation with George Adams, who's an interventional cardiologist at Rex Hospital and the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He's director of cardiovascular and peripheral vascular research. And on top of that, I don't know how he finds time, but he is the chief medical officer at Cordis. So we had an amazing conversation. We spent a bunch of different topics. It was pretty fun. So I hope you guys enjoy. Bye.
All right, everybody out there, I am stoked. Dude, I am stoked today because remember how we say there's like all the amped and stoked? There are, remember the list of 10 people when you and I sat the first time, Lucas, about the 10 people we wanted? And I remember saying, oh, dude, I'm going to put these 10 dudes and they're all stars and studs and it's going to be our first 10 shows and it's going to be amazing. And literally, I think my batting average was 0 on the first 10 because I chose just my 10 good friends that are also super famous and busy, and none of them could actually say yes. So anyway, George, you are part of that short list of people that I really wanted on early, but it took us just a little bit over a year to get you here.
Yeah.
So finally, welcome. I know it's not been your fault. It's been an issue with scheduling, but finally, welcome to the Life of Flow podcast, man. It's so cool to have you here. Thank you very much for being here.
Miguel, I am stoked to be here. I mean, it's always awesome to have interactions with you and discussions. And, you know, I think our discussions today are going to sort of shed some light on why it's so difficult sometimes to get people like you, sometimes to get people like me together to have a discussion. But let me tell you, when we get together, it's so rich. And I learned so much from you. And just I'm so humbled to be here. This is wonderful.
Well, we do appreciate you, man. It certainly means a lot. And one thing we do here that's pretty customary for the pod is whenever we have a new guest is we want to understand where their love story or probably love and hate story, because at the end of the day, we go through so much to get to where we're at. A little summary of how you ended up being that you are an interventional cardiologist. How is it that you ended up, enamored, passionate, and super involved, that obviously to the point that you're not only a key opinion leader, but you are the chief medical officer of, one of the top companies in the world at a global scenario. So how did that story start and unfold?
So, Miguel, this is a little bit of a complicated question because I think all of our paths are different but very similar. And I think it starts with having the inability to say no, right? So whenever we're given the opportunity, we always take the opportunity, and there's a lot of them. So I grew up on a farm in North Carolina, raising cattle. So just to start there, I've always learned and worked very hard for everything we've had. And that's what was instilled into me. I still remember my grandfather always telling me, he who hesitates is lost, right? And that just sort of rings true with me. So I started off in North Carolina, went to undergraduate at NC State, medical school at East Carolina, which is on the East Coast of North Carolina, and then had the opportunity to go to Parkland, UT Southwestern in Dallas, Texas, for internal medicine, and then realized that much like on the farm, I loved working with my hands, pursued cardiology, went back to Duke in North Carolina, did general cardiology, pursued interventional cardiology, having the opportunity to do endovascular work, made a name for myself in the cardiology realm with chronic total occlusions, and then realized that there was a void in North Carolina. And remember that North Carolina smokes a lot of tobacco, has a lot of obese people, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol was rampant, and peripheral arterial disease was rampant. And back in the early 2000s, there were very few people that were doing high-end endovascular work, right? A lot of people got amputations. So understanding the skills that I had with 0.14-inch platforms in the coronaries, I translated that to peripheral work. But much like yourself, Miguel, I strongly believe that the three pillars that we stand by, right, is number one, providing the best clinical care. Number two is moving the field forward with research initiatives. And then once we've moved the field forward, is educating others with what we've learned, right? So understanding that, I did a lot of research at Duke, got a Master's of Health Sciences in Clinical Research, and then stayed on staff there for 10 years at Duke, and then was ultimately recruited to UNC to help build their heart center, and pretty much self-taught in the peripheral space. Don't get me wrong, my major mentor was Jim Zadar in the coronary space, world-renowned, but he gave me the education, the techniques, the tools to translate to the peripheral space, and then all these exotic accesses, all these tools that we've had the opportunities to work with, we perfected them by working on a number of patients. So that's sort of my story in a nutshell. And let me tell you, Miguel, not only did I grow up on a cattle farm, I still have cattle. And that's what makes me a little bit different is for my retreat, right, is going home, right? Being on the farm. We have several hundred acres. I've got about 120 cows, 6 horses, 2 dogs, about 30 chickens. Man, I love it. And that's what I do for recreation. So that's a little bit about me.
You're not the only Life of Flow guest that grew up in a farm. Let me quiz you on that one. Do you have any idea which other Life of Flow prominent vascular interventionalist grew up in a farm?
Gosh, I would love to know, but I'm not sure. Miguel, did you grow up on a farm?
No, not me, man. I was a city boy in San Jose, Costa Rica. But Marianne Brodman, dude, Marianne Brodman grew up on a farm, was actually sent to be a nun, and then rebelled against the whole thing, and ultimately ended up being a physician. And obviously, the rest is history. But it's interesting also to understand those links. Tell me something before we go into the more serious side of things. But do you remember any story that you think shaped potentially your personality from those days? You mentioned your grandfather as one key person, but maybe there was a time where there was an issue with some cattle or some story as a kid growing up. Any of these things that ultimately show you a lesson, and then you apply that, right, moving forward, and then sometimes you even bring it back, or you tell it to your trainees, or you tell it to your patients sometimes. Is there any of those things that just stuck with you through the years, and you bring light to it every so often when you're giving advice?
Yeah, let me bring it back to my grandfather once again. So remember, my grandfather was an all-Southern running back at NC State.
Oh, wow.
Just a strong individual. Was in the military, went to NC State, played football, but unfortunately, he developed Alzheimer's disease. And the interesting thing about Alzheimer's, right? So my mother always left because my parents had to work. I called my grandfather Poppy. He would stay home with me, and I was supposed to look after Poppy, and I was a kid. But remember, we grew up on a farm, and what's interesting is, I could tell you stories out the wazoo, but there were times where, my mother would leave us chores, right? And one of those chores would be to burn the trash, because we had a canister out in the, behind the house, so we would burn the trash. And then we would also hang up the clothes and on the clothesline to dry after we washed them. Well, Poppy would get confused, and he would end up burning the clothes and hanging the trash, right? So hold on now. I'm going to take you somewhere with this. So I learned very quickly that I didn't put my clothes in the hamper that he was going to go hang up, because he's going to burn those. So I took all my clothes out, and I would wait for him to start burning them and start hanging the trash, and then I would go hang my clothes up. So I learned very quickly I didn't burn my clothes, And my mother would be very, very upset because she would come home and see that everyone else's clothes are burned, but not mine. But where does this take you, right? So um, commonly I tell my fellows, listen, I've taught you everything that you know, but I didn't teach you everything that I know. Right. So I think that rings true, right? There's always an opportunity, but don't get me wrong, we all learn from each other. But just putting a little bit of joy into the stories, my grandfather was very impressionable on me. I mean, the thing is, even though he couldn't remember in the short term, he could definitely remember the long term. And I have so many stories of history of him being in the Philippines, him being in Alaska, him being in Cherokee, North Carolina, working with the Indians, teaching English, for example. I mean, there's so many stories that he told me historically, even though he couldn't remember the things that happened or, a couple hours or days before, which was unfortunate. But, I cherish those days. And the thing is, he always worked hard. I mean, let me tell you, he was a brick mason. He was an English teacher. He was a very strong religious individual. And his morals, his integrity, um, I think help carve into who I am. I mean, I spent a lot of time with him.
I have no doubt about that. I think that's a common denominator amongst most of us is there was somebody in in our path that had a incredible work ethic, right? That showed us on a daily basis, what it was to go out there, what it was to persevere, what it was to keep going, right? I look at my dad, my dad is a physician, right? Well, my dad had a spinal cord injury when he was in his 20s. Well, he went on to rehab. He went on to get married. He went on to continue and he didn't only, get a specialty in spinal cord injuries, but he showed up every day. And then, I was a kid very early on. I mean, I'm talking about 4 years old, and my mom passed. She had spherocytosis, so she had a bad pneumonia, and she didn't have a spleen at the time. That was all they could do because this was before the pneumococcal, uh, the pneumovax, and so that wiped her. And it was obviously some rocky times, but I remember my dad just going out there every day grinding. And so whenever I feel bad about myself for a microsecond and I'm like, man, why me? I just think, dude, my dad had no legs. My dad lost his wife and he still persevered every day, worked and grind and was able to take me, alone because he never ever married, right? Because a lot of us, I put probably myself in there. I mean, if I lost my beautiful wife today, I'd probably go out and get another one real quick because I know that I could do this thing of being a dad alone now that I am a dad. So anyway, I digress, but it's all to just say there are these people in our life that just imprint and then push, put some wind behind our sails and then obviously just see us bloom. But it's very incredible that most of everybody um, has a story of somebody that they had very dear to their heart that pushed them in the right direction. So thanks for sharing, man. That was great. Lucas, I interrupted you on this tangent, but you were gonna dive into a question regarding his professional path.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask a curious question. Do you think that cardiologists kind of jumped into peripheral work faster than vascular surgeons because of the facility with smaller platforms? Because that's an interesting point.
Yeah, and you remember Grunzig was the first one to start these endovascular therapies, right? In the coronary space. And so we were trained in the coronary space in terms of in being in the heart, going from a femoral approach, going to the radial approach. So we knew access. Very similar to interventional radiologists, right? They knew access as well. So I think we had a platform. We were familiar with the tools, and we were familiar with working in small places.
And at the time, we had a great conversation with um Sahil the other day where we were discussing that at the time, your generation wasn't necessarily dazzled by structural. It wasn't necessarily at the point where it was this super shiny object. Um, that potentially pull people. And I think cardiologists always, I don't know, I think a lot of you guys that are especially interventionalists always seek to find something that will define you, right? Like there's this need to be the best at. And even Roberto, Roberto Ferraresi, a dear friend to us, his show aired last week. And in his words, he said, I was a cardiologist and there were a lot of famous cardiologists, but in PAD, nobody famous. I was John Wayne of the peripheral arteries. It was just a great story because, right? I mean, there seems to be this need amongst probably a lot of us, but certainly ICs to say, at some point, I have to be like a sub something. And I guess that was a good opportunity, even though I didn't know that you did a lot of CTO and coordinator work. You see, that's new to me. I thought you essentially went straight into peripheral as an IC.
No. And Miguel, for me to do the peripheral work, there were no guidelines. I was criticized, right? In fact, at Duke, once a month, there was a group of people that would come and review all my cases. The head of vascular surgery, head of cardiology, and they would review it. And what was interesting is the outcomes 90% of the time were great, right? A lot of times after the review, even though they were very critical during the review, several of them would come up to me afterward and go, "What did you use to open that up? Now, how did you do that again?" It was good, and I think it helped push the field forward. But we were, as I guess Roberto would say, we were John Waynes or cowboys. Granted, Roberto's a different cowboy. He's a generation before me, but I mean, he's a true cowboy. But we learned from him in seeing that. But to be honest with you, Miguel, when I was doing this, I didn't know there was Roberto Ferriasis out there. I didn't know there was Andre Smiths out there, right?
Yeah.
I was on an island by myself.
Yeah, no, the globalization of the PAD, I feel is much more contemporary.
It has elevated and balanced everybody out because you see, and people in South America that are in places that you wouldn't expect are doing the same thing, like using very similar techniques, even though their equipment is different. Their technique is the same technique, so it's not like we're doing things so differently now, which is very interesting.
Or sometimes even better, Lucas, right? I mean, I've been, I've sometimes gone to, a small city in the middle of nowhere with very little resources, and they're doing ultrasound guided balloon angioplasties to save extremities because the patients don't have any resources, and so they don't have access to a C-arm. And I was like, this is ridiculously amazing, right? I mean, I guess, right, if there's an SFA stenosis and this isn't anything crazy, you put a sheath, you drive a wire, you can see it, and then you can see the balloon, and that's all they do. And in my mind, I'm like, right? And then I, obviously fast forward, we Yihad and some of the other people that have taught us using ultrasound intraoperatively to improve, man, these people are already doing it almost like without x-ray. So it's advanced. I think when we look back at the last 15 years, I think we should certainly give ourselves a pat on the back. I wouldn't say that we've done perfect, but I think we've done really good to get out there to show, through Hendola, through Link, through AMP, through all of these meetings that have been global, and they come at a great cost for faculty. We've discussed that at different times, right? A lot of time, a lot of effort goes into all these presentations, and a lot of it largely with no remuneration. But at the end of the day, just looking at the world where it is, it's pretty impressive. To the point that we've had to start rethinking the meeting. In Endolat this year, we had to essentially, for 2025, we are just making it a complex case forum. Because all the guys were like, hey, this ABC of retrograde access, nobody cares about it anymore because everybody's doing it because you taught us how to do it 5 years ago. So, I think we have to change the forum. And we have to change the form. Actually, I think I see a mutation, a transformation of all these meetings because the audience is right at with us or maybe above us. And I'm talking to us as the KOLs that go around and talk about the same things in different places of the world. But like when the audience is there with you, you got to figure out something else because you've got two clients. You've got industry and you got the people sitting down wanting to listen to you. If you don't have anything new to say, they're going to get bored. They're not going to come. The meeting becomes stale. And then industry leaves. So there's a need to balance out things and find out what the best perspective is. I don't know. What's your thoughts, George, on this?
Yeah, Miguel, and one step further, right? I think your audience is right. But the good thing, and one of the things that you're excellent at, is fostering that mentality to innovate, fostering that mentality to think outside the box, right? So in order to innovate, in order to move that field forward, it takes a collaborative of people, right? We can mention a couple things, but there are applications with what we do, right, that you can use in other places in the periphery, for example, right? There is advancements in the field, whether it be from a device development standpoint, that we've learned, say, from another area that we can apply to this piece, right? So, and I can give you some examples, like taking drug-coated balloons and going from paclitaxel to limus, for example, to say, listen, we've become an expert at treating above the knee, but we need to now treat below the knee. And we need to figure out other avenues, such as if we can't do it arterial, then maybe deep venous arterialization, which you're an expert at, Miguel. So, things like that, we have evolved to move the field forward, right? And we will continue to do this. And there's always opportunities. And the demographics of the population continue to change.
That's it. That's for sure. That's for sure. Let me ask you both. I read an interesting post the other day. I'd love to quote the author, but I don't remember who it was. But it was very interesting because it was essentially a cardiologist, and he was very openly critical to the peripheral interventional world in saying, you guys are just doing exactly the mistakes that we did in coronaries. And I don't understand why you're going through the same process. You started with POVA. We did POVA and coronaries. Guess what? Didn't work, right? We then went to drug-coated balloons. Guess what? Some of them didn't work. Guess what? We migrated to, limus. Guess what? And it was like one after the other. And when I read it, my gut instinct was, he's kind of right. Like, do we really have to reinvent? Because it's a different territory. And are we just falling on our own swords? Are we wasting time that we should be investing in something? And it was all actually a post started by Michel Lichtenberg, where he said, POVA first in peripheral disease should be archaic. Meaning nobody should ever say, I just do plain old balloon angioplasty and I figure it out the next time and see what happens. And that was the answer from somebody which says, yeah, you guys doing POVA first and a lot of advocates for POVA first makes no sense when you know that there's all these other devices, potentially devices or potential technologies that have already shown to be better in coronaries. Of course, one can make the argument coronaries and tibials are vastly different histopathologically and so on and so forth. But there's some truth to that. I know your gut reaction to that criticism.
Yeah. So let me remind you. So I'm a cardiologist. So I'm gonna play both roles right now. Remember, 60 years ago, we started off with plain old balloon angioplasty, right? Then we realized that there were two mechanistic failures. One is acute closure. The other was restenosis. We addressed the acute closure with the bare metal stent, realized that the bare metal stent addressed that, but did not address restenosis. So we put a drug on it, right? So we realized that we had paclitaxel and we had limus. Then we did head-to-head studies and showed sirolimus was better. Now what has happened because of the peripheral space is now cardiologists are realizing that the drug eventually goes away and you're left with a metallic scaffold and you have an inflammatory nidus and restenosis. So now we come full circle and saying now, how about if you can put a drug on a balloon, get adequate balloon angioplasty, and just fill out with the scaffold when you need it? And we learned that from the peripheral space.
Oh, so you think
Right?
that happened in return?
That is right. So I think
Interesting.
we've gone back and forth, and now because the thing is, we couldn't figure out how to put limus on a balloon. Right now, we figured it out, and we're evolving. I'm not saying it's the best, but I think we're evolving. We've got a platform, and we've got an opportunity to not only do this in the peripheral space, but also to do this in the coronary space. So again, I agree with you, different vascular beds, but if you can get similar results with similar device therapies, why not? And you both learn from each other.
I think there's a
That's
big
just one example.
I think
Yeah,
there's a big
Lucas, you
difference.
were mentioned this the other day. You were on your moral high horse here saying what what you said, am I dumb or somebody needs to explain this to me? You said, why are people mad when we're looking at patency? Like, why are the academic surgeons getting mad when we're declaring patency on a study? Isn't patency what it's all about? And I said, well, patency in the setting of maybe an infection, maybe all you need is a balloon opening and so on and so forth. But then this discussion
No, I
in a way
mean,
is like,
well,
okay, well, if you get path A with a balloon with 30 days of patency, or path B with a stent or a bioabsorbable scaffold or a drug-coated balloon with, triple, quadruple, sextuple, patency, then there shouldn't be a question. Patency is ultimately the
well,
response, right,
for
Stuart?
that device, yeah, for that device, yes. Like, if you're studying the application of a wound salvage system that has one paradigm versus the other, and you put everything together. But for a atherectomy device, I just want to know how long it's going to stay open. For a tibial stent, I just want to know how long it's going to stay open because I can piece out, okay, this part, the revascularization part, from the wound care, from the offloading, from the infection. But I think that the coronary space and the peripheral space are different because our goals are different. Our goals for the peripheral space, most of the time, the things that we do is wound healing. So, for that, I think that, in the heart is different. So I think that that's going to bring some nuances to it. And also, and then pathophysiology. So we talked with Roberto Ferraresi about it, and, the distal 2/3 of the tibial vessels and below the ankle, the pathophysiology is different. Is mostly on these diabetics and interstitial diseases, medial artery calcinosis. So tibial stents, atherectomy, balloon angioplasty, probably completely inadequate for that. So that's another difference. And then length. I think length has a lot to do with it. The probabilities of a flow limiting dissection or dissection that leads to cause you to have to stent because a bailout is higher because there's more of a chance along the longer vessel than a coronary. So I think there's some differences to it. How did they affect that? I'm not sure in full context, but I'm sure they have an effect.
Yeah, I agree with that. So technically, with an acute result, I think it's important. But one of the things that Miguel has taught me, right, is that it's more the reason we do what we do is to improve patient outcomes, right? It is major adverse cardiovascular events, just like you've said, right? Patency is one of those things. But the other side of that is this. So if you have a device and you can acutely open it, right? And it goes down, say, in 30 days, they've got a wound, for example. Is that a failure? Not necessarily, because Miguel's going to go back in there and reopen it. But what's interesting is the number of times that he opens it, right? There's an increase in the duration of him opening it. So, for example, the first time he opens it's 30 days. He gets another good result. He comes back in there a second time. Now it's 60 days. Now it's 90 days. Why is that? We see this in the coronaries as well, and it's called ischemic preconditioning. Why do in the coronaries, for example, does a younger person, if you occlude one of the coronary arteries, they die? But if you take an 80-year-old and you occlude the vessel, they do just fine because they've had time to develop all these collaterals over time. This younger person hasn't. But in the periphery, when you open this thing up multiple times, what we realize, you can actually heal the wound, and this person doesn't come back as frequently. Probably because you developed all these other collaterals. Probably because there's other ways to get blood flow there, just like DVA and these other techniques. So again, I'm not saying that you're wrong. I actually agree with you, but I think there's maybe more to the story that we're learning about, which I think is cool.
I agree, and you know what? I'll be controversial though, is I don't necessarily agree with just deciding that intermittent claudication is something we should never treat. And because you said, this is all about wounds. I was like, okay, yeah. I mean, a lot of it is wounds and probably mostly should be wounds. But there's a significant portion of people that are miserable. And there is not widely available exercise programs. And also, guess what? Exercise programs take time, effort, and discipline, which is certainly not what defines the American citizens. But and so I would say, yeah, I mean, endovascular, an old endovascular, with inappropriate tools can be dangerous. But it is undeniable that there's advances and that we're doing much better, and that our atherectomy devices don't embolize or have progressed to being much better and more efficient. And our drugs are more efficient. And so why completely remove the potential of progress and almost like, I don't know, vilify it? And all of a sudden just, you're like a villain if you're even considering that with your patients. Well, guess what? I've got a ton of patients that I treat for IC. I feel very comfortable. I have those discussions with them. I say, look, we've had progress. It's not perfect. And funny enough, in that particular subgroup of patients, that's where I think patency is everything. Because the intermittent claudicator, when that restenosis, they immediately come back and they're like, doc, I need a touch-up, right? Like, and I would love to be able to say, hey, this is going to work for 5 years or 10 years. I mean, I don't want them to be on my doors every other month. I don't have an atherectomy shop. I'm not trying to do that. But man, if we had something really, really good that gives really good long-term patency and it's safe, I don't know why we should not be able to even consider this in the algorithm of care of a patient.
We can, but it comes to my point that you have to start from the precondition. What is the outcome you're going for? So the outcome you're going for is symptom relief, and thus that's a proxy for patency. Then you're going for patency. And then you kind of have to have an honest conversation and say, like, is this 20% that progresses a true thing? And then that has to be one of the goals of research, to decrease that. Because I'm sure, like, you can't bet against technology and human innovation. That's kind of like, so you just can't bet against it. That's a history. So yes, we can do it, but then we have to talk about it and put that as a goal. So for intermittent claudication, we have a different goal, and that goal is, symptomatic relief, and thus patency, and the prevention of adverse events. So that 20% that progresses to critical limb ischemia, then that's a goal of the therapy to prevent that from occurring. And I think that's a noble goal. There's nothing wrong with that goal, but we just have to be very clear about it.
Agree. Let's shift real quick the conversation. I really want to learn a little bit more about conceptually when we've talked about all these efforts to educate, to progress, to move the needle. And honestly, George, you're everywhere, right? I mean, I would say that this old joke applies to George, which is, what's the difference between George Adams and God? And the difference is God is everywhere. And George Adams, he's everywhere, but in North Carolina. So I'm sure, I'm sure your family and your bosses at the hospital probably sometimes give you shit for that, for not being there, because you're all over. You really give yourself to education. You're in every meeting, in every continent, all the time. But there's a meeting that we all have dear and close to our hearts, which is AMP. And I feel AMP came to fill a void, certainly in the U.S. market, expanded eventually to the European market. But you were there at the inception of it, and I'd love to take a few minutes to understand how that project came and what it's meant for you, over the years.
Yeah. So an AMP is an amazing meeting, and Miguel, we go to multiple meetings around the world, and we devote ourselves to education, but there's something special about AMP in the sense that it really was a CLI meeting, a critical limb ischemia meeting, focused on all therapies, right? And trying to promote innovation. We started this, gosh, 2010, I think, was our first, and we did our first show in Michigan. Then we took it to Florida, and then realized the best home for it was in Chicago, and trained fellows. We trained other industry partners, trained physicians, etc. And it was more or less to promote the patient who had wounds that were not healing, and understanding exotic access, crossing techniques, therapeutic regimens, whether it be from a pharmaceutical standpoint or pharmacotherapeutic standpoint or mechanical standpoint. And we covered everything. We even had cadaver labs in our early ones, and we still do, actually, at sites so people could put their hands on actual specimens and practice these techniques. So
I really loved. I remember also at the beginning I was there. The first one in Chicago, not the. I wasn't there in Florida or in Michigan, but when it hit Chicago, I was there, and one of the things that I was the most impressed with was how many wound care and podiatry folks were at the meeting. And I thought that was really, when I watched that, I was like, that was my aha moment with this meeting. And I said, this is going to be really good for our patients, because integrating all the podiatrists into these tracks and showing them the stuff that people were doing, I think they were good emissaries, right? They would come back, they would ask the guys that they would work with, like, hey, have you looked at these pedal axis? And I bet you that more than once, people were like, oh, what are you talking about? And then it in a way pushed them to have to go and seek that training or find some training. And I thought that was legitimately the first time that I saw a fairly aggressively sponsored meeting that was not necessarily societal in nature, really target the toe and flow and try to disseminate that toe and flow model throughout the country. And I think that's one of the biggest accomplishments that AMP has had throughout the years.
You're right on the money. Bringing different disciplines together, podiatrists, wound care specialists, vascular surgeons, cardiologists, radiologists, and bringing them together, not just nationally, but internationally, and having that cross-pollination, as you commonly talk about, is so powerful, right? Because now you get people not only thinking on the same line as Lucas talked about earlier, but you get them working together. And when you can break down these silos and work together, it's just a betterment for patient care. No question.
I mean, I would even say that imagine if your podiatrist comes and says, hey, man, I was at a course and there's these guys doing this. I would say that you would probably adopt that faster than if you just saw your peers doing it, because then you would probably be like judgmental or be like, oh, these guys, why would I have to do that? But then when your referral source is saying, hey, heads up, there's something interesting out there, you're going to listen to that, because that would be business dumb if you don't listen to somebody that actually feeds you what they're seeing, what they're hearing. Because if they don't feel that you're all the way up in your top game, I mean, now that I'm in private medicine, I see it more than ever. Your referrals are as strong as you can keep them engaged, as strong as they know that their patient is getting top-notch care. If they feel somebody else can provide it better, they'll drop you like a sack, like on the spot. It doesn't matter how friendly you are, because at the end of the day, those patients also have access to Dr. Google. And so they're asking the questions, and then the podiatrist has to ask the answer. So there's this whole relationship. So I honestly just view it as a win-win. Bringing them over, let them elevate their knowledge, let them ask those questions, permeate what's going out there, and then have us come back to the table, right? I mean, there's so many things that we could be doing better nowadays that it's just crazy that we don't transform at a faster pace. But I guess that's just the pace at what things go.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And Miguel, it's more than just podiatry as a referral. I mean, I get referrals from vascular surgeons. I get them from interventional radiologists. I get them from cardiologists alike. And you do too. I mean, you know what I'm saying? If I know that Miguel Montero Baker does something better than me or can offer something further to my patient, I'm sending them to Dr. Miguel Montero Baker. I mean, and the reason I'm sending him is not because he's a vascular surgeon, because he provides good care that I can't provide otherwise. Right? And that's the way it should be.
That's the way it should be. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
What's on the horizon for AMP? Are you excited about it? We're going, you said 2010, so we're probably looking at 10 or 11 of these already, year after year after year. They've grown to have a very successful European effort. Our good friend Joss has done a phenomenal job at replicating and making it, very European-like. And to all of you, if you don't necessarily love Chicago, then I bet you that you love Lugano.
That's right.
Because Switzerland is just something else. I know it sometimes jumps from place to place, but
are we
but what are
recording
you
there?
excited?
Are we recording at Amp
I
Lugano?
mean, listen, we teamed up with the good folks of HNP and recorded in Link. Why wouldn't we do Switzerland for 2025? I say that we should.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. No question.
So anyway, what are you looking forward to this year? What do you think we should be doing to try to innovate on the educational side? We mentioned briefly earlier how the audience has already grown or surpassed us, and I think that's a challenge that we have to face, because we have to also train the people that are starting. They may not know that, but we want to also make sure that the people that already are doing this, that heard us 10 years ago, still find the need to come to these meetings and learn and progress. So where do you think that challenge leads us to evolve from that standpoint?
Yeah. So Miguel, in my opinion, there's going to be a lot of new data that's going to be presented, not just at AMP, but at other meetings that we got to make sure. And these are international meetings, for example. You mentioned primary patency a second ago in the SFA POP. There's going to be a 3-year data set that's going to be presented at JET coming up, for example. Right? So there's a lot of new innovations with new devices that I think people need to be aware of, and we need to come together as a group to say, okay, if this is happening here, what can we do in other vascular beds, for example? Right? So that's one example. So below the knee, for example, if you proved it in the SFA POP, can you translate it to the below the knee, right? And then to say, well, these devices we have are personalized. Can we improve the efficacy of certain treatment strategies by providing better prep, for example, right? And where does that apply to certain patient populations? So I think there's a lot of really cool things that, even though we're versed at certain techniques, certain devices, for example, the application may be different as we learn more through these clinical trials. So that's one example.
How do you think, AMP is going to evolve in the age of, X and LinkedIn, people presenting cases, talking about data there? Like, there's a lot of information that's being talked about. Usually people can cite things. Obviously, there's a lot of anecdotal stuff, but what's the place of AMP in 5 years? I don't know. Have you thought about that?
Yeah, and the thing is, there's a lot of meetings, but I think those meetings, you definitely need a personal approach, right? So for people who can attend personally, I think there is power with that. But at the same point in time, you still connect the world through the ability to transmit virtually, just as we're doing currently, right? But you can't replace hands-on, for example. You can't replace that personal interaction, those personal conversations at an actual meeting. And it actually gets you outside your comfort zone. It gets you outside of the walls of your institution, right? Now you're in a place that everybody's an equal playing field, and you can talk normally. I mean, you can talk exactly how you feel. And I think that's important. So I think there's power in being there personally, but these meetings are going to be selective. You can't have a million of these meetings because we don't have time to go to every meeting. So
Yeah. I personally think that the more niche meetings have still a role, right? If I go, and again, listen, nothing against Dr. Reith, he's done an amazing meeting, but I feel like these is just so big and there's so much that my personal interest potentially may be a little bit hard to niche, right? If I'm a carotid guy and all I do is carotids, well, there's going to be maybe an eighth or a 12th of the sessions that may have some impact for what I do. And in the time of subspecialization, then it's going to be hard to keep these meetings afloat that are like a lot of everything. As industry also kind of loses a little bit that attention, I think the niche meetings, so AMP, Click, FYI, those are meetings that almost are like niching themselves into areas, and in a way, leaving behind the time where, if you're a PAD CLI guy, you don't really go to TCT, right? Like it's too big of a meeting with too many people, and maybe you go for other purposes or for other reasons. But I still believe that the nicheness of these meetings is really important. And I do believe there's a call to action. And I'm saying that reflexively because I'm also a course director at AMP, specifically for the DVA day, which is, I believe, the Friday or Saturday this year. But we need to make a lot of high complexity case forums where we're discussing amongst peers and understanding that barrier that we had at some point where we're so much better than everybody below us, that's gone. I think that we have to understand that people are seeking that. They want to talk to you, that they want to meet George Adams in person. They want to talk to Miguel Montero in person. They want to understand who Lucas Ferrer is. They want to have a beer with us. They want to talk to us. So a lot of that human interaction still needs to be protected, but within a high level discussion that still propagates that interest. You need a lot of hands-on stuff, and you need to find places where trainees can also feel very comfortable coming to. Although also some niche places for trainees are starting to pop up here or there. But I feel that that's something very important. And then I do agree with Lucas. I think that there's an opportunity to be a little bit more social media involved. I think that 3 days of amazing content, if you add the European meeting, should be significantly more visible on social media. There should be reels, summaries of data. I mean, George said it. There's so much new data coming out. Why isn't it all over the internet? Like, why? I don't understand. Like, I should be targeted. I get targeted for stupid rheumatoid arthritis because I guess I'm old enough now, or Viagra all over the place. But, there's not enough on PAD care, right? And so I feel that there should be a much stronger push in that sense. So hopefully that would be something that I'd love to see them do. I'd love to see them do. But yeah, obviously we'll have to have those discussions and push it in the right forms to see that change. But I will say, call to action. Anybody out there, if you are a CLI fighter, if you are somebody that cares about this, loves PAD, and wants to be a niche meeting that really just addresses that, carve the time and come to Chicago. Because first of all, Chicago, come on, you can't go wrong. Great food, great places, great scene, great bars. Lucas, I know if you come, you're going to be out till 3 or 4 in the morning. That's not me anymore. I'm a father. I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It's me, right? Yeah, it's me.
That's yeah. This is what I call projecting.
This
Okay.
is called mirroring. Oh gosh.
But anyway, guys, listen. We've got about 10 more minutes with George here,
Yeah.
and we haven't really touched on a super interesting topic, which is the opportunity to become CMO. You want to tell us a little bit about what that journey's been like? You know, how did that opportunity come to you, and a little bit of how it's been, and the
Yeah,
good, the bad, the ugly,
no, it's
the
great.
pretty.
Yeah. No. It's been interesting, right? It's a lot of work. So Miguel, I'll be honest with you. My true passion is taking care of patients. I mean, I love being a physician, and I'll be the first to tell you. And if you took me being away from taking care of patients, I wouldn't be happy. So this opportunity came about with that understanding, right? I was very
So is that a
straight.
part that does that mean that that's a part-time position that you carry?
It is. It is. It's not a
Okay, so
full-time
you're
position.
clinically active. Okay,
Absolutely. And still very busy. I've got 8 cases tomorrow, in fact. But
understood.
so, it was carved out, understanding that Cordis was bought by 2 private equity companies, KKR and Hellman and Freeman. And they were trying to revitalize Cordis, much like it was back in the Cypher days, right? And it was an opportunity. I got an opportunity to look under the hood at what they were trying to accomplish in terms of innovation, in terms of education, in terms of making a company that could help both the coronary, the cardiac, and the peripheral space, because that's their niche. And my microphone is huge, right? So I cover 67 countries. So literally, not only do I continue to practice clinical medicine, I continue to use devices, pharmacotherapeutics from every industry. I also travel the world educating, innovation, and helping develop research initiatives to try to further the field. In fact, I mean, you sort of were making fun earlier. I mean, I was in India 2 weeks ago. I was in China 4 weeks ago. I came back Saturday from Italy. I'll be going to Portugal, London, Japan in a week. But the thing is in between, I work as a physician. It keeps me relevant, right? And I love doing it. But at the same point in time, I go to these different countries, and what do? I do cases. I give lectures, and then I meet with Cordis people trying to develop better research initiatives and better innovation. It's outstanding. It's stuff that we do regardless. But now I've sort of picked a team, not to say I don't work with other companies and help them to further the field, but my focus is Cordis.
So you've had the opportunity to do a case in other countries?
In probably 20 different countries, Miguel.
That's pretty
Tell
cool.
me your craziest, wildest live case, or not live, but like craziest OUS case experience you've ever had.
Yeah, probably the craziest live case. I remember you were moderating the case for Hindelot for me, and you go, George, it would be okay if you said, listen, I'm backing out and we aren't going to do this case. And I looked at you and I said, Miguel, are you serious?
I feel bad, man. It looked like you were stuck for hours and hours. I'd see you looking at the clock, and I'm like, he probably has 6 more cases.
Uh-huh.
And he's here trying to decipher our English as a second language. And we're just kicking with questions and questions. He's trying to get, dude, it was the most horrible CTO I've ever seen. And there was like clot and embolization. And like, it was like one after the other.
It was great.
And I was like, George, like, it's fine. We could come back. And he was like, no, man, we're going to keep going.
Yeah. But no, but that
The
was
result was great.
Oh yeah, we always have a great result at the end. But the thing is what I think is not necessarily one case or one transmission. When you go to other countries, Miguel, not only are you able to practice medicine, but you engulf yourself in a different culture. And with each place, it's different, right? And the devices they have on their shelf are different. So you may be on the back table cutting certain things or using a Bunsen burner to shape certain things because you don't have those devices, for example, right? But the most interesting and the most humbling And the most exciting thing for me is being able to interact with other colleagues, experiencing the family members of the patient and the patients themselves. Right? It's just it's outstanding. I mean, I just, China's different, India's different, Europe's different, Latin America's different, Canada's different, the Middle East is different. I mean, I could just go on and on and on, but each one of these experiences, I'm going to be honest with you, they touched me, and I would like to think that I positively touched them as well.
What's your favorite country or city to visit out of all these places in the world you've been to? Which is the one that you say hands down, put it in your bucket list if you haven't been here, because it is something out of this world.
Yeah, I would.
And which one do you like the least, too?
Oh boy,
I can't say like
you can't ask that to a guy from North Carolina. He's too good to answer that question, man.
Yeah. But I think every place is great. But I can tell you there are a couple places that have really opened my eyes. One is Peru, with Machu Picchu. Right. I mean, it's just
it's magical.
It's incredible.
Magical.
Prague in Europe, Berlin in Europe, France, Paris, London, some of these big cities. But even the other places like Mumbai in India, or New Delhi, or Bangkok, for example, in Thailand, or
I've never been to Bangkok or New Delhi. Those are still on my. I gotta get there.
They're amazing. And then China. I mean, holy cow. I mean, it's amazing. Just a number, and it's the number of patients. Literally, we say here in the U.S. For me, we work at a 600-bed hospital, which is pretty big. Man, they have 5,000-bed hospitals, and the place is full of patients. They're all in the stairwells. I mean, you can't even walk. It's just amazing.
They're all smoking.
They are. Yeah.
There's 5,000 bed hospitals.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
South Korea, China, India. I mean, it's just amazing. And let me tell you something. I'll give you one more story. So in India, it was in India. There is a hospital, right? They do 18 cases in one cath lab an hour. I'm gonna let that sit for a second. Imagine
Wait, what?
18 cases, one cath lab, an hour.
What type of cases?
That doesn't even make sense.
These are cardiac. No, it does. So then you get so I roll up into there. They've got all the stretchers of people in a train. They have a fellow getting radial access outside the room. Patient rolls in. They put the catheters in. They shoot the diagnostic coronaries. They roll them out. Next one's in. It is absolutely incredible. So this site,
insane.
This site was actually has the Guinness Book of the Guinness record for number of cases, and I was like, wow.
I'm sure there wasn't a meeting about it, but I can just imagine the meeting in my head. Like, listen to me, guys. Listen to this idea. We get them outside. We put them on a train.
Oh man, I swear the hospitals I worked with have the World Guinness records for the least cases.
The least number of cases. Yeah,
I'm with you.
Fucking hour. Jesus Christ. Listen, guys.
Oh my God.
This has been beautiful. George, I appreciate your time as always. You're such a fun guy to talk to, such an inspiration. So many good messages. And I say what I say to everybody. This is your home, the Life of Flow podcast. We'll always have the lights on. If you ever have some fun data, some fun facts, you want to come and talk about your cattle a little more, you're always welcome to come here, brother. We love you. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll be in touch. Huh?
Yeah. Love y'all too. Thank you so much for having me here.
Thanks, George.
It's a true
Appreciate
pleasure.
You.
Yeah. Thanks, Lucas. Thanks, Miguel.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
See y'all later.